Kenya's biggest conversation enters the third hour, and we thank you very much for tuning in this morning. We are live on Spice FM around the country. We are live around the world on Spice FM KE, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and also our website, www.spicefm.co.ke. We are also live on TV, KTN Home, for the next 1 hour. In the room is Eric Latif, and Nduoko CT Muga has taken a break for a couple of days. He'll be back shortly. Today's Maasai Proverb. It's a Maasai Proverb week this week.
Yeah, we are with you.
Yes. Now that CT started promising Mount Kenya Proverbs and he couldn't even get one, can produce 5 Maasai Proverbs. The withered tree will destroy the healthy tree as it falls down. The withered tree will destroy the healthy tree as it falls down. The wisdom of the Maasai. Yes.
I just keep thinking about all those movies when you say, look, if I'm going down, I'm taking you down with me. So kind of like it's the same thing.
Yes. You're the withered tree, and I'm this healthy one, and you're taking me down with you. Yes.
Okay. You cannot be in the presence of witherment and remain healthy.
Yes, that's true. That true. That true. So the ethical tree will be destroyed by the non-ethical tree as the non-ethical tree comes down. And the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission will be left there saying, you see? See? The ethics. And Transparency International Kenya will see, this is what we've been talking about, fighting corruption and non-ethics in the country. Let's have that conversation with them this morning, all right? Sheila Masinda is the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya, and Philip Kagucia is the Head of Corporate Communications at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. They join us via video link this morning. Good morning, Philip. Good morning, Sheila.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Drew.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on the show again today. And this is a continuation of a conversation we had a couple of days back on what is the citizens' perception on ethical leadership in the country. And this is out of a survey that you had conducted as Transparency International Kenya called My Leader, My Choice, Citizens' Perception of Ethical Leadership in the Country. The report details findings of a survey that was conducted by TI to establish the citizens' perception, attitudes, and opinions on ethical leadership as espoused in Chapter 6 of the Constitution, and to understand Kenyans' perception of their role in promoting ethical leadership in the country. You took us, Sheila, through a number of the findings that you had at that point. But let's just, as we continue with this, let's start from a definition, a basic definition. In your own understanding, what is ethical leadership?
Simply, for me, ethical leadership is leadership that is driven by the public interest. It is leadership that does the right thing for the public interest. We know that as leaders, we have various opportunities, to enrich ourselves or to promote, we get opportunities for self-aggrandizement. But when you're a leader in that opportunity, the first person that you should think about is the public. That person who has put you in office and not yourself, or you should not be driven by vested interest. For me, that is simply what ethical leadership is.
Okay.
And to the man who's been given the job to internalize what Kenyans were saying in the Constitution and in the laws, and then speaking about them as the head of corporate communications, Philip Kagucia, what is ethical leadership from the EACC perspective and the legal perspective?
Thank you, Latif. If you recall our last conversation, we made reference several times to Chapter 6 of the Constitution, because if you go to Article 73, it starts unpacking what the ingredients of ethical leadership include. And as Sheila rightly points out, the public people in positions of public trust, they're there on our behalf. So there's certain conduct we expect of them. But even before they get there, one of the things the Constitution says is that their selection should be on merit. And I think this is one of the challenges we are having as Kenyans, because I don't know if we fully understand or we have fully internalized the issue of merit, because if somebody gives me a bit of money and gets on the ballot or pays me to vote for him, I'm not sure that translates to merit. So, selection on the basis of merit, and the moment this person is in that position of trust, they have to conduct themselves with transparency, because the other side of the coin of transparency is now accountability. And so what you find is Chapter 6 now unpacks all the various ingredients that make up ethical leadership. But I think we should start with the selection on the basis of merit.
So Sheila, with the findings, and even as we go forward with these conversations and asking ourselves, okay, so what is the psyche of Kenyans right now? Would you say, from these responses that you've been able to get, from what we see currently happening in the country, that there is a sufficient percentage of ethical leadership presently in the country?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say that there's a sufficient percentage of ethical leadership in the country. Reason being, and you only need to look at, the number of cases, corruption cases, and other criminal cases touching on the leaders who are currently in office, whether it is elected or appointed officers. And so, for me, the fact that we have had a number of these leaders in these very important positions, flouting Chapter 6 of the Constitution, since the enactment, since the promulgation of the Constitution in 2010, it is really a key marker that, Chapter 6, I keep on saying this, that, Chapter 6 has been observed more in breach than in compliance. And that's because we see a lot of our leaders who have had to troop to court have been arraigned. Some have been, impeached, removed from office, told to stay away from their offices by the court. And that's really an indication that our leadership does not really reflect the provisions of Chapter 6 or the aspirations that we had when we passed our Constitution. Even when you look at the findings, though, you find that Kenyans really would want to associate with ethical leadership. When 81% tell you that they are likely to vote for someone with issues, and when 75% say that those people who are accused of corruption, whether proven or not, should actually be kept away from the ballot and not allowed to vie. That should be that Kenyans, on the other hand, have high ethical aspirations. It's a matter, I know we had a big debate about it, and I'm sorry he's not here with us. We raised quite some pertinent questions. But there's a big disparity between what Kenyans aspire and what they are actually doing in reality. When they're in the ballot box, they're given that opportunity to, and act as a thief by, choosing the, wheat from the chaff, separating the wheat from the chaff. But I think for me, the fact is that Kenyans, we hope that in 2022, and we're working towards it, to ensure that come 2022, we'll have these aspirations actually translated to reality. It is a high task, but we are equal to the task. As we come together with different agencies, civil society, media, and even the state actors. But I believe that is something to work with. The fact that Kenyans desirous of ethical leadership, leaders who actually ascribe to the values which are form the key foundation of the Constitution. When you look at Article 10 on national values and principles of governance. So our work is now to translate this aspiration to reality, come 2022 and beyond.
But then, Sheila, even as you conducted this survey, did you find that there's a unified perception or interpretation of ethics among the respondents? Well, was everybody responding to the same question with the same understanding of what ethics means?
I think generally, yes. Because when you find people resoundingly, when you look at the findings, most people when it came to those questions around ethics, like would you vote for someone who has a corruption case or who has been accused of corruption? What do you think about people who have those kind of cases? Should they be allowed to vie? Should they just stay aside? When you look at the number of Kenyans coming to say, and vote on the side of integrity, I think there's generally an understanding, yeah? And I think we've done our work in the last few years, whether as EACC, as civil society organizations, in terms of promoting awareness and knowledge. And it's not just even about the people we spoke to in the survey. But generally, right now, when we go out for our outreach function, people generally understand, what is corruption, what is ethics, what is right and what is wrong. But it is a matter of translating that to practice, as I emphasize. Yeah. And I think you'll find that aspect in many challenges. Even if you look at the work around HIV/AIDS, it took a while before we translated, the knowledge to attitudes and then to practice. Yeah, and that's why I keep on saying we really need to craft a behavior change model, that is able to translate what Kenyans know is right to now choosing leaders who actually demonstrate and actually do what is right for the public interest.
I'm asking that because, again, I'll come back to what I was still raising the last time. When 82% of the respondents indicate that they are unlikely, very unlikely, or unlikely to vote for a candidate with a history of corruption, that's a very high threshold. 75% believe that a person who is convicted, who is accused, or who is under investigation for corruption should not be allowed to contest for a leadership position. That's a very high percentage. And then you also look at 59% saying that they would willingly accept a bribe from a politician, irrespective of whether they would vote for them or not. That's more than half of the population. That's why I come back to ask, we hear corruption, we hear all these things, but have we internalized this corruption and drawn a direct link between corruption is equals ethics or non-ethics?
And then it would appear, as even as you look at that, and then also, Sheila, and maybe you could also jump on to this as well, Philip, is that it would appear that ethics then would only be applied to leadership, but that when you are involving yourself in something that is a bit dodgy, it is not unethical or immoral, except when it is at leadership status. So it would seem as though there's a separation between then who is corrupt or who is unethical and who is not. Do you see that as well? Because if you would not vote 82% resoundingly for somebody who's been involved in a case before, but you would accept a bribe from such an individual, from the same person, what are we saying? We're all in the same pot, are we not?
Yeah, but also let me add, I think we also debated about this yesterday. So that's the whole thing. And as I said, it's a whole debate about, from knowledge to attitude to practice. Because yes, 59% say that they would accept a bribe, but then again, 90% of those who say that they would accept a bribe would not go ahead to vote, for that person, necessarily vote for that person that gave them a bribe. Though of course, as a principle, we were telling Kenyans is don't accept that bribe. It's not even right to accept it whether you're going to vote for that person or not. But as I said, the work that is cut off for all of us, including you in the media, is how do we translate that into practice? But then the other thing, again, and you're right, that we have been telling Kenyans is we actually normally say that the leaders, the people we vote for, are a reflection of who we are as society, So it is not an accident when we have people who do not meet the standards, the thresholds of Chapter 6, yeah? Because also as a society, there's something wrong within our society. But then it goes back to our ethical foundation, our values. And in fact, one of the things we're talking about now is that we need to go back to the basics, How do we start talking and instill learning on ethics? It doesn't even have to wait until someone goes to school. It needs to start from the home. What kind of role modeling do we have, for children from the time they're growing up? Because this is where it starts, And so it's a whole question around our own even values. How do we demonstrate them within the family setup, from the family to the society, before we even scale it up to the leadership? But yes, even as we talk about the questions around ethical leadership, we also have to tackle the problem of ethical citizens. Are we ethical citizens? Now, we didn't focus so much on this in this study, but some of our previous studies, like for instance, the Kenya Bribery Index that we launched last year, and I know EACC have also done their surveys, I think every 2 years, annually. Philip can advise us on some of the findings there as well, because one of the questions we actually also pose to citizens is, have you done anything? It's not just about what the leaders have done, but what have they also done, in the fight against corruption? So again, you find the same trend. A lot of Kenyans will, in terms of their aspirations, they will say, that most of them will say that, they abhor corruption. But then when you ask them in practice, yes, but did you actually do something, against corruption? And for instance, one of the common things that someone would do is report corruption. Those channels are now, our EACC has its channels, also civil society as Transparency International Kenya. We have centers, advocacy and legal advice centers where people can report corruption, and we try to create awareness on these avenues for corruption reporting. But you'll find, like last year, we found only 13% of Kenyans say that they will report corruption when they witness it. Only 13% of Kenyans. What about 87% who witness? Many of them don't report. So there's a whole, of course, they don't report for many reasons. One of the reasons, again, is that they don't feel adequately protected, when they come out, and risk life and limb to report, because we don't have any whistleblower protection mechanism. In Kenya, we don't have, they're not sufficient in terms of our laws and our policy and institutional framework, but then that's another thing. But the fact that Kenyans, they will say, yes, we abhor corruption, but then when it comes to action, very few do anything to fight it. So it's a whole question around also how do we center this discussion among citizens. But it has to start from a very early stage, and that's why I still emphasize, the role of the family. What are we talking about with our kids when we sit around the dinner table? But it's not just about what we're talking about, but what are we showing them? How are we role modeling, as parents and as older people in the society?
Right. So, Philip, for you, even look at EACC and the work that it does, and then, vis-a-vis this information that comes out now as a result of this study, how then are we going to be able to leapfrog from the place where we are, just kind of like oscillating in one place, saying, okay, well, anybody who then is charged with some of these issues brought before a court of law, but then nothing really happens to them. If we say that things like deterrence comes into play, and to say that, all right, this is where we should actually be going to, but we see court processes taking long. We see individuals who've been convicted coming back to serve in houses of parliament. How then do we say this is what we strive to achieve if the process itself doesn't really seem to be working?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. But before we even get to that, one of the things we must appreciate is the work that was put into this study by TI, because this represents research and the outcome is empirical data. And because we have data, the interventions we are designing going forward are based on facts. They're not based on theories. They're not based on ideas that people have. They're based on empirical data. The thing about corruption, in my opinion, it's an existential thing. It's almost as deep and as strong as an issue of faith. Now, we were talking about whether Kenyans are truly ethical or they're just pretending. It's exactly the same thing with faith. Are we good Christians, good Muslims, good Hindus? Do we never sin? Why do we need to keep going back to our places of worship regularly? It's because we need to keep being reminded. And the kind of work that you find EACC and people like TI doing is reminding people that, okay, we are all human beings, we all our weaknesses, but these are the standards we should be aspiring to. And when you ask and do about ethics and leadership and whether there's a risk of it being interpreted as applying solely to people in positions of leadership, this is what I would like to say. The reason there's an emphasis on people in positions of leadership is because those people are in a position of public trust. They are exercising control over public institutions. Whatever they do, the decisions they make affect very many people. And we really need to emphasize, because those are the people we look up to anyway. And we're hoping if you set the tone at the top, there might be some sort of trickle-down effect where everybody knows that, same thing like in a family, the head of this house conducts himself in a certain way. So we also try and align ourselves with that kind of conduct. And, again, the research didn't really talk to the respondents about what they have done in terms of corruption. Although I noticed that, and Sheila will correct me, a huge percentage of them said, about 60% said they will take money irrespective of who they decide to vote for. There are other platforms, for instance, one that is known as iPaidAbribe.com. And in that one, you'll be able to see people actually saying, I paid a bribe. And those kind of reports are also found in our biannual surveys. And just to answer the last question that Ndu asked, if we are still experiencing a challenge, we have the laws and we have the surveys, the reports, and we are going on outreach. What is it that we can do? And this is a message that EACC is going to continue reinforcing. If we are accepting that at some point maybe the law is not giving us the tools to bar these people or to remove them, the one thing that is not in debate is that a citizen can vote someone out or can refuse to vote a corrupt person in. So the message is this: if there's a weakness somewhere, and we are struggling as law enforcement agencies, as civil society, as private sector, you as a citizen have a role to play, and your role is decisive, and there is no question about it. If you refuse to vote in a corrupt person, he can't go to court and say, these people refuse to vote me
because I'm corrupt.
That's very, very true. That's very, very... Chapter 6 will best be implemented by the citizens themselves. Everybody else is just helping the implementation of Chapter 6. We thank you very much, Philip and Sheila, for joining us this morning in this interesting conversation. Let's have it again soon as we roll out the implementation of the report or programs on this particular report, so we can continue the conversation. Sheila Masinde is the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya, and Philip Kagucia is the Head of Corporate Communications at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Have a lovely day, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.